Imagine standing in a crowded room, right? You have exactly 30 seconds to convince a total stranger that your entire professional life is, actually worth their time.
Right, which is completely unnatural.
Exactly. I mean, usually when we talk about human connection, there's this expectation of organic discovery. You meet someone, you exchange some pleasantries.
You slowly peel back the layers over time. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a natural progression. But then you step into the professional arena, like a high-stakes job interview or a massive networking event, and that organic timeline is just completely shattered.
Yeah, suddenly we're handed a stopwatch and told to, prove our worth before the other person's eyes just glaze over.
It's the ultimate distillation. And frankly, it's where so many of us completely freeze up. So we are exploring the mechanics and the philosophy of this today, specifically drawing from the comprehensive guide, Best Ways to Introduce Yourself, essential tips and examples.
Right, because there's a really fascinating central question here, I think. Is an effective introduction fundamentally a strategic, achievement-focused pitch of your professional value? Or, does heavily indexing on optimized metrics and structured formulas actually undermine the primary goal of building authentic rapport?
Well, I'll be taking the stance that using the text's structured, value-driven framework is an absolute necessity. I mean, it's the most effective and respectful way to communicate your professional worth in environments where, frankly, time is a luxury nobody has.
And I will argue the opposite. I think prioritizing hard metrics and strictly tailoring your identity just turns a human being into a product on a shelf. It over-commodifies the individual, and ultimately it hinders the genuine human connection that the guide itself claims to value.
Okay, so let's dive right into the core of this framework. The guide points out something we all know intuitively, but often forget. The first 30 to 60 seconds of an interaction serve as an informal assessment.
Right. The person listening is immediately evaluating your communication skills.
Yeah, and your professionalism, your ability to synthesize your background. Now, I view this structure not as a constraint, but as a really incredibly useful tool. The framework breaks an introduction down into a functional formula, right? State your name, your current role, your relevant accomplishments, and your future goals.
But wait, think about the inherent tension in that text.
How so?
Well, on one hand, it explicitly warns us against sounding robotic, right? And it heavily emphasizes the importance of building rapport. But then, on the exact same page, it pushes you to insert highly synthesized, metric-heavy achievements into a casual 30-second window.
Well, sure, but in a professional context.
But I argue that treating an introduction as a verbal resume heavily biases the interaction toward a pure transaction. You are optimizing entirely for utility, and when you do that, you risk falling into the exact pitfalls the guide warns against, You risk sounding arrogant, you risk sounding deeply unnatural, and worst of all, you marginalize the actual human being standing in the room.
I see why you think that, but let me give you a different perspective on utility here. Let's think about the cognitive load of a hiring manager who has interviewed, say, 10 people today. Their brain is tired.
Oh, for sure.
Right? So when you provide clear achievement-based evidence, rather than a rambling list of past job descriptions, you are doing the cognitive heavy lifting for them. You are saying, here's who I am, and here's exactly how I can solve your problems.
Okay, but let's look at the specific advice on highlighting achievements over broad job descriptions.
Yeah, take the guide's example of Daniel Reyes, the senior accountant. Daniel doesn't just walk in and say, I manage accounts and work with accounting software.
Which is a bit vague, yeah.
It's very vague. Instead, he explicitly states that in his previous role at a fintech company, he led the transition to a cloud-based accounting system that improved reporting efficiency by 40%. To me, that data-driven approach is just brilliant.
Brilliant or totally unnatural.
Brilliant because it instantly establishes credibility.
But I just don't buy that this is how human beings actually connect. Let me tell you why. Imagine sitting across from someone at a table, or worse, standing at a networking mixer with a cup of coffee. In the very first 30 seconds of meeting them, they look you dead in the eye and say, I improved reporting efficiency by 40%.
Well,
how is a listener supposed to neurologically process that highly synthesized data point without feeling like they are simply being pitched to? What is the natural human response to that? Wow, Daniel, nice percentage.
I think you're mischaracterizing this setting.
But the guide specifically lists sounding too arrogant as a major pitfall to avoid, advising us to aim for confidence humility. Injecting a 40% efficiency statistic into the very first breath of a conversation aggressively violates that warning. It doesn't sound like a human greeting. It sounds like a LinkedIn post read out loud.
That's a highly entertaining image, yeah. But I would frame it differently because context is everything here. You're imagining this interaction happening at a casual coffee mixer, but the guide explicitly categorizes the Daniel Reyes example under job interview self-introduction. The context dictates the content.
Even so, an interview is still a conversation between humans.
Yes, but in an interview, the fundamental purpose of the interaction is evaluative. The interviewers actually want to be pitched to. They literally open with questions like, walk me through your background. If Daniel merely says, I transitioned accounting systems, he's being vague. And vague isn't humble, vague is unhelpful. The 40% metric isn't arrogance, it is precision.
But precision can really quickly bleed into presumption. The guide rightly notes that the introduction sets the tone for how interviewers interpret your entire resume. If your opening gambit is a raw statistic, the tone you are setting is entirely transactional.
Transactional isn't inherently bad in business, though.
It is when you are essentially telling the room, evaluate me as a machine that produces a 40% efficiency gain. What happens when the next candidate walks in and says they produced a 50% gain? You've commodified yourself right out of the running. By focusing so heavily on the metric, Daniel Reyes has neglected the narrative of how he led that transition or why he cares about the work. And that why is where true rapport is built.
But in a 30-second window, you don't have time for the entire why. You need to secure their interest so they ask those follow-up questions. Which actually brings us to the next critical step, how these achievements are actually packaged for the audience.
You mean the tailoring aspect?
Exactly. The guide refers to this as controlling the narrative, and it stresses the absolute necessity of tailoring your introduction. It gives us the example of Dr. Lisa Mendoza giving a presentation. She introduces herself as a leadership development consultant with 15 years of experience in Southeast Asia, focusing on organizational psychology.
Right.
But then she explicitly tailors her intro to the room, stating exactly what she will be sharing, practical techniques to build high-performing teams in hybrid work environments. This tailoring establishes authority and sets clear expectations for what the audience will gain.
Right, she targets the room.
Yeah, tailoring isn't about deception. It's about absolute clarity. She is controlling the narrative so the audience can relax, knowing they are in the hands of a qualified expert who understands their specific needs.
That's a very compelling argument for a keynote speaker, I'll admit. But have you considered the logical extreme of this tailoring advice for the rest of us?
The logical extreme.
Yeah. If we're strictly tailoring our introduction to every single setting, shifting our narrative to match whatever the hiring manager, the networking contact, or the conference audience wants to hear, we are essentially operating like a chameleon algorithm.
A chameleon algorithm. Explain how you mean that.
Think about how a recommendation algorithm works on a social media platform. It optimizes instantly for the highest click rate based on the immediate behavior of the user in front of it. It has no core message. It only mirrors what the user wants to see.
I see where you're going, but
If your 30-second narrative is in a state of perpetual flux to please the listener, if you are constantly swapping out your keywords to match the immediate environment, you begin to lose your baseline identity. This directly contradicts the guide's stated goal of making an authentic first impression. You aren't being authentic. You are being reactive. You become a mirror, and nobody forms a deep, trusting relationship with a mirror.
I am not convinced by that line of reasoning at all, to be honest. Because tailoring does not mean fabricating. Dr. Liza Mendoza really does have 15 years of experience. She really does study organizational psychology. She is simply selecting the facets of her genuine identity that are most relevant to the room.
Facets, right.
Let me give you a better way to visualize this. Think about a standard, brilliantly cut diamond. A diamond has dozens of different facets. Depending on how you hold it to the light, different facets shine.
Okay, and elegant analogy, right?
When you angle it differently for a different audience, You aren't changing the fundamental carbon structure of the diamond. You are just directing the light. The guide advises us to use our judgment to match the tone of the introduction to the audience. When Dr. Mendoza focuses on hybrid work environments for that specific presentation, she is providing a service to our audience by filtering out the noise.
The diamond analogy is elegant, but human beings are far more volatile than diamonds. When you train yourself to constantly filter and tailor, you run the very real risk of becoming hollow.
Hollow, that's a bit strong.
Well, the guide explicitly says the goal of an introduction is to set the tone and ensure you are remembered favorably. But a chameleon isn't memorable. It blends in perfectly. If you over-tailor your introduction to match the exact keywords of a job description or the exact theme of a networking event, you end up sounding exactly like everyone else who read the same guide. You become a perfectly polished, entirely forgettable reflection of the company's own job posting.
I strongly disagree that filtering out irrelevant information makes you forgettable. What makes you memorable in a professional setting is your competence and your alignment with the listener's needs, which actually brings us to what I think is the most fascinating and maybe contentious part of this framework.
The categorization of personality.
Yes, the explicit categorization of personality. Let's look at the hierarchy the guide lays out for a strong self-introduction. Step 1, name. Step 2, current role. Step 3, relevant experience. Step 4, goals. And finally, Step 5, explicitly marked as optional, a personal touch.
Yes, optional. That single word carries a massive amount of weight in this guide.
It does. And I defend that hierarchy completely. The guide recognizes that in a job interview or a professional networking event, demonstrating suitability and career goals must take precedence.
Over who you are as a person?
Let's look at their example. It provides the example of Miguel Santos introducing himself on his first day of work. Miguel mentions he is a junior data analyst, that he graduated with a degree in statistics, and that he worked on data visualization for nonprofits. Then, at the very end, he mentions he is from Davao and enjoys playing chess and hiking.
Which is great.
Now, that personal touch is lovely, sure. And it's appropriate for a first day of work. But let's be brutally honest, it is entirely secondary to his statistics degree. If Miguel suddenly only had 15 seconds instead of 30, the chess and the hiking would be the first things cut, and rightly so. Utility must precede personality in high-stakes environments.
This is where I push back the hardest against the framework. Relegating personality to an optional afterthought is exactly why so many professional interactions feel entirely soul-crushing today.
Soul-crushing is a bit dramatic.
It is. The guide's stated goal, again, is to ensure you are remembered favorably. I argue that being remembered favorably is almost never achieved solely through a metric-optimized summary. Let's look closer at Miguel Santos. You say his statistics degree is the most important part of his introduction.
It is what qualifies him for the room.
But think about the reality of his situation. If he is joining a team of 5 other data analysts, they all have degrees in statistics. They all know how to do data visualization. The metrics and the technical qualifications are table stakes. They just get you in the room. What actually makes Miguel memorable to his new colleagues?
You're saying it's the chess.
Exactly. It's the fact that he is from Davao. It's the fact that he plays chess. Psychologically, it's called the isolation effect. People remember the one piece of information that stands out from the rest. Those humanizing elements are not secondary, they are the anchor for genuine rapport.
But the guide is very careful to contextualize when to use those elements. The Miguel Santos example is specifically categorized under first day of work or class. In that context, yes, the primary goal is relationship building with new peers.
Right.
But if Miguel were in a high-stakes job interview, leading with his love of hiking risks committing one of the primary pitfalls outlined in the guide. Going off topic, the guide explicitly warns against long-winded tangents about unrelated personal experiences. Treating the personal touch as optional is a necessary safety mechanism. It prevents nervous people from losing the plot when the stakes are incredibly high.
I counter that treating the personal touch as optional makes avoiding the guide's other major pitfall, sounding robotic, nearly impossible. The guide tells us to practice without memorizing, because over-rehearsing makes you sound like a robot.
Which is good advice.
Yes, But think about the underlying logic. If you have systematically stripped out all of your personal interests, all of your geographical background, and all of your hobbies, and you are left with nothing but a highly tailored template of job titles, years of experience, and percentage increases, you literally are a robot. There is no humanity left to express naturally. Miguel Santos is memorable because of the humanizing elements, not in spite of them.
I don't think it's fair to say that communicating your professional journey lacks humanity. I would argue that competence itself has a deeply human resonance.
How so?
When Daniel Reyes talks about his 40% efficiency improvement, he isn't just reciting a number. He is implicitly telling a human story of dedication, of complex problem solving, perhaps of late nights working to master a cloud-based system to make his coworkers' lives easier. We don't need to hear about his weekend hiking trips to respect his professional journey.
That's projecting a lot onto a simple statistic.
The guide provides a fill-in-the-blank template for a reason. It gives people a reliable, tested structure so that their nerves don't get the better of them, allowing them to speak with clarity.
But a fill-in-the-blank template is the antithesis of authentic connection. The guide literally says, "Hi, I'm blank, a blank with blank years of experience." It is Mad Libs for careerists. It's highly efficient, yes. It is safe, absolutely.
Exactly.
But it trains us to view ourselves as a collection of interchangeable variables rather than cohesive individuals. When we rely too heavily on these optimized formulas, we sacrifice the very nuances that make us uniquely valuable to an organization in the long run. We train ourselves to pitch a product rather than introduce a person.
Well, as we look to wrap up this discussion, let's sort of reflect on where our arguments have taken us. I maintain that this source material provides a highly pragmatic, absolutely necessary framework.
Right?
In professional environments, time is drastically short, and the stakes are incredibly high. You simply do not have the luxury of slow, organic discovery. You must communicate your professional value clearly and efficiently. By structuring your introduction around relevant achievements, like Daniel's 40% efficiency metric, and by tailoring your narrative, like Dr. Mendoza, you are acting with professionalism. You are showing deep respect for the listener's time and cognitive bandwidth.
And my summary remains that while structure certainly has its uses, rigidly adhering to an optimized, achievement-heavy template is fundamentally dangerous to human connection.
Dangerous is a strong word, but go on.
It is, because it risks stripping the introduction of its core humanity. By treating the self as a commodity to be tailored to the immediate demands of the room, and by relegating the personal touch to a mere option at the end of a checklist, we miss the opportunity to forge the genuine, lasting connections that actually sustain our careers and our well-being.
Despite our distinct positions on how heavily to lean on these metrics, I think it is really important to acknowledge where our perspectives clearly converge. Both of us and the guide itself agree on the foundational premise. The first 30 to 60 seconds set a critical tone for any interaction.
Absolutely.
We also completely agree on the absolute necessity of practice. The guide rightly warns against common pitfalls, like rambling, speaking too fast out of nervousness, or using exclusionary jargon that alienates the listener. Preparing for those brief moments is not up for debate. It is essential to professional life.
Exactly right. We are completely aligned on the reality that introductions are high stakes and require thoughtful preparation. Where we diverge, and where I suspect we will continue to disagree, is on the actual composition of that preparation.
Right.
You see, that critical tone is leaning heavily toward a calculated, precise demonstration of utility to the listener. I see it as requiring a more holistic, authentic presentation of the self, even if that means, leaving a few impressive statistics at the door in favor of shared humanity.
It is a profound balance to strike. Analyzing the mechanics of our everyday professional interactions reveals so much about what we value as a culture. Are we our achievements, or are we the sum of our quirks and histories?
That's the big question.
Yeah. There is undoubtedly much more to explore in this source material regarding how we negotiate that line between strategic presentation and authentic identity in our career narratives.
It really is a delicate line we walk every single time we meet someone new.
Indeed. So the next time you find yourself reaching into your conversational pocket to hand out that verbal business card, ask yourself, are you just handing them a list of optimized metrics? Or are you actually opening a door to who you really are? Thank you for listening.